welcome back. You are watching and listening to Breakfast with Ellie and Martin. And it's time to go through the papers now. And joining us this morning is journalist and author Susan Holder and journalist and commentator Ella Whelan. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
And Susan, we're talking wine. It's never too early.
Yes, but we're not whining about wine. It's a good story because all that rain that everyone moaned about for weeks and weeks and weeks actually has done a bit of good, because apparently English winemakers are expecting a bumper crop because of all that rain. They do need a bit of sun now into September, which I think is on the cards, but they're saying that they are actually getting much bigger yield because of all that rain, so that's good. And I didn't realise just how huge an industry this was. Apparently in 2021, £335 million worth of stock was exported to non-EU regions and £132 million to inside the EU. It's a big business.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's great.
I like a bit of English wine. I was once asked
sparkling.
Yeah, I was once asked to leave an English vineyard. Yeah, because I went cycling down the Camel Estuary Trail down in Cornwall, and there was along the way, so I cycled with my top off,
Martin.
Poof, I got down there, ordered a glass of wine, and they said, we don't want people like you in here. And then a coachload of tourists arrived, and they're all, like, suited and booted.
I think that's fair play, Martin.
Yeah, they kicked me out for being a yobbo.
I think that's...
Shirt off, unless you're on the beach.
Yeah.
You should keep your shirt on.
Yeah, I think
good advice.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Cruelly
Ella, what are your
denied.
thoughts on...
Well, I've just come back from a little mini holiday in Devon where all the farmers are really panicked about the other side of it, that their crops are getting...
Too wet.
Yeah, it's too wet. So it's nice to have a little bit of... I don't know whether this would factor into the whole kind of food security. I like the idea that securing English wine would be part of a food security.
We can't live on wine
plan.
alone, can we? No.
Well, we can drink...
But it is a central part.
Yeah, we can drink to forget, I guess. It's interesting how English winemaking is on the boom, though, because, of course, one of the things I'm always fascinated about was that during Roman times, we could abundantly grow wine because the climate was warmer. Maybe it's not about climate change. Maybe it was just warmer historically. A little bit of a diversion there. Ella.
But Europe is on fire, so, you know.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Well, bits of roads off. It was arson. Anyway, Ella, fascinating story here. This is the war on the countryside oil boiler, which has been called the countryside oules.
Yes, so we're sticking on the issue of warming or not so warm in the case of having to replace your oil boiler. So when Boris Johnson was in charge, there was, net zero was all the rage, and there was this plan put forward as part of the net zero package to have a ban on installation of new oil boilers from 2026. So that would mean you would have to, instead of having an oil boiler, be put in ground source heat pump, one of these things, something that was more eco-friendly. A big problem for people who... Not such a big problem for people who live in the cities, or they're still extremely expensive and all the rest of it. A very big problem for people who live in rural areas and off the grid. Obviously, this was a key... at the start, this was a key thing that Rishi Sunak was going on about net zero, said he was going to continue the legacy of being climate-friendly and blah, blah, blah. And after the recent by-elections with the kind of... round that's happening over ULEZ, the government seems to have had a change of heart and is now pointing out, which has been made a mockery of in some of the papers, that this wasn't ever a promise or a pledge, it was just a consultation. And that is true. It was a consultation that hasn't been answered yet. The submissions are in, and the government now has to decide what it does about this issue of oil boilers. In other papers, we have manufacturers coming forward and saying, can you please make a decision, because we don't know what to produce and what supply will be like. But it's interesting that, I think it's important to point out to viewers that this isn't because the government has necessarily had a change of heart in terms of the politics of environmentalism, but that, as the Telegraph points out, around 1 in 7 households in the constituencies of cabinet ministers are off the power grid, meaning they'll be affected by this. So there's a lot of this change of heart, particularly after the recent by-elections, is about winning elections, or about winning a future election, rather than actually the important things around the installation of boilers, which is that heat pumps, we know, aren't as effective, are more expensive, take up more space, take up more time, need your home to be insulated, which is very expensive, not something that most people out there, however eco-friendly they are, can afford. And
surprise, surprise, if potential Conservative voters are kicking up a stink to Tory MPs because they've got to pay a £10,000 tariff to have a new heat pump, there's been a bit of a backlash. It just seems so wrong-headed.
Well, the
this approach.
infrastructure's never there for the idea, is it? It's like electric cars. That's a fine idea if you've got enough places to charge them. If you don't have enough places to charge them for the amount of cars that you need, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Susan, let's have a look at this story in the Mail, shall we? And this is about how an apology gift makes things worse.
Well, this is what they're claiming in the Mail. I'm not sure about that. I think what it says is if you try and placate your partner with anything involving other than just the word sorry, it's a bad idea. Just say sorry, don't buy a gift. And the thinking for that, I think the person who's written it just doesn't want to buy anything. But the thinking is it comes with bad vibes. It has a kind of guilt connotation, so the person isn't going to accept the gift or like the gift as much, and they probably will re-gift it or just throw it away. I don't know. I think if somebody's bothered to go and get a gift as part of their sorry, doesn't that mean that they are sorry rather than... Words are easy, but if you've gone to get a gift... But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I've been on the receiving end of this a few times, having bought a kind of placatory, or so I thought, bunch of flowers, for example, misdemeanours such as not making it home that night. And I think...
Misdemeanour. That's not just a misdemeanour.
Well, so what I'm saying is, I think the bigger the gift, the bigger the crime. It shows you've got something to hide, and I just think it's a dead giveaway.
What did you hide?
Well, just add a few too many.
Yeah, we need to investigate this, I think, a bit more. But what did you buy?
Well, so here's another fatal error. Never buy an angry woman a bunch of flowers from Tesco.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Peel off the label at least.
I don't know, it's quite a good thing to thwack you with, though, isn't it? You get quite a good thwack from a kind of...
You can do better than that, Martin.
Yes, I can. I won't go there again.
What do you think, Ella? Apology gift make things worse?
I think probably I agree with Martin that it just solidifies the guilt, but it's also the case that, you know, as the flowers are sort of stood there in the jar and wilting, it would just remind me of how angry I was at you.
Yeah.
It would be different if a box of chocolates, you eat them and it's done and everyone's happy, but it depends on...
So chocolate is the way to go.
Yeah, probably.
The flowers become a metaphor for the wilting love.
And also the partners, you know, the husbands never put...
Very poetic.
They never cut the flowers and put them in the jar. You've got to do all of that. It's just more work for you.
Yeah. Least said, soonest mended, possibly, is the truth of that, then, yeah.
Well, Ella, you're just talking about chocolate there. Let's stick on the theme of snacks, shall we? Because noisy snacks at the proms apparently leaving the audience members popping mad.
This is hilarious. I love this story. So at the proms at Royal Albert Hall, since 2014, they've sold popcorn, not any old popcorn, it's popcorn in beautiful glass containers. This is very proper for the proms, and sweets and crisps and all the rest of it. And people have been increasingly bringing them in, it appears. And the other night, right at the point at which, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, this is terrible, Francis Poulenc's Dialogues of the Carmelites, sorry to anyone who's not a Philistine like me, but that during the most sort of passionate moment of that performance where someone is singing a really beautiful thing, a fist went into a popcorn jar and 2 American tourists were rustling very loudly. But rather than ignoring it, a man who has been described as... You have to look this up, anyone at home.
This is brilliant.
A man described as resembling a posh Jean-Paul Gaultier began kicking the seat in front, using foul language and causing a real scene. And it became this big thing. And it sparked off this discussion, which is that should you be allowed to eat noisily in an opera? It's not quite like a cinema where there's a bit more of a sort of populist feel, but there needs to be absolute silence when someone's singing their aria or something like that.
I think they've got a point. Yeah. In fact, even at the cinema, I can't bear it. You know, if I go to a kids' matinee performance with my kids, I have to sit on the front row because I have to have all of that eating behind me because people are like delving into their crisps and they're stuffing them in, crunching, and I cannot bear.
People who eat smelly hot dogs in a cinema, what is that? Now, I have zero tolerance for any of that. If you go to the cinema, the theatre, I've never been to the opera, but clearly it's now got there, which is at least it shows that people are doing it everywhere. It's not just kind of us plebs at the cinema who are suffering from this. But I have no eating, no talking, no texting, no.
And watch out.
No singing along.
Watch out for a posh Jean-Paul Gaultier.
The references in the
I think I probably have to stand up for the fact that I remember being a teenager and going to the cinema on a date would be where you'd you know, there might be a bit of knacking in the back row and some whispering and some, you know, rustling of popcorn. Isn't that
I think we'd put up with
Not that many teenagers go to the opera, so maybe that's not so much of a problem.
I think we'd put up with that. I mean, a bit of fumbling kind of in a back seat, I think I'd put up with more than people talking, texting and...
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about that. I think I'd rather someone was to be nibbling on popcorn than
nibbling
on each other.
Yeah.
Well, or a bit of both. I mean, yeah, whatever floats your boat.
Not. Susan, let's move swiftly on, shall we?
Yes.
To the Daily Express. And Shakespeare's plays were nearly lost forever.
Yes. Now, this could kind of split the audience, I think, because I think some people love and respect Shakespeare, and a lot of people would not care if they never saw anything to do with Shakespeare ever again. But I think people need to understand that Shakespeare obviously lots of the phrases we use, lots of the language that's common actually comes from Shakespeare. And what this piece in the Daily Express explains really well, actually, is how during Shakespeare's life, all his plays were published as flimsy little kind of pamphlets. Yeah. That's all there was, obviously. And it wasn't until 7 years after his death in 1623 that two of his colleagues collected all the works together and put them in a bound copy. There were 750 copies made, and this is what's known as the first folio, which is incredibly famous. There are still 235 copies of that first folio in the world that we know of.
But they're worth a few quid on them.
They're worth millions. So one went for 7.84 million at Christie's in New York. So you're unlikely to find one like, on your shelves, but they are. But I do think it's really interesting that we could have lost all of that work. And even if you don't enjoy going and watching Shakespeare, and I know a lot of people don't, the themes and the stories from Romeo and Juliet to Midsummer Night's Dream to Macbeth, those are rewritten in kind of various ways by writers now. And I mean, I've taught drama for years. We did a rock and roll version of Romeo and Juliet, and the kids loved it. The stories are so strong that actually it is really quite shocking to think that we might have been denied all of that. That would have been incredible.
I had no idea you were so cultured.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah, beautiful.
I hide it well, obviously.
Okie dokie, and we've got time for one more. Ella, in The Guardian, authors threaten book festival boycott over sponsors' links. Is this more fossil fuel stuff?
Well, going from the sort of high culture of the importance of Shakespeare and all the rest of it to a pretty sad state of affairs, which is that the Edinburgh Book Festival is sponsored by an investment company which, as part of its investments, is into fossil fuels. And a bunch of authors and attendees of the festival, including Zadie Smith, Gary Young and others, novelist Jessie Burton, have come together and said that we will boycott the festival next year if you don't encourage this investment firm to stop investing in fossil fuels. It's, it's a real kind of the sort of paying respects almost to Mother Earth in this sort of way of obsessing over climate change is a real kind of middle-class weakness, and particularly at a book festival it shows the sort of insubstantialness of it, which is that we know that we've just been having discussions about heat pumps and oil boilers. We know that the question around fossil fuels is not as black and white and good and evil as they make it out to be. It's a complicated issue of which you have to balance issues around the environment with issues of affordability and making sure that people have energy to heat their homes, run their cars, all the rest of it. And that, to reduce this down to a bunch of snooty authors saying they're not going to go back to a festival, I think shows you the tenor of this debate.
You think they'd be grateful for any money they got coming in these days? Anyway, we have to leave it there. Ella Whelan and Susan Holder. That was fantastic once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.